As new as this Yamaha YZ250FX may seem in concept, Yamaha has been mixing the lines between the motocross and off-road in a competition-only form going back as early as the 1970s. Even before the riding time of many reading this test, remember the IT. But lately that in-between bike did not exist in the company's lineup, it was or WR or nothing. And getting that hybrid, a mostly motocross bike with an electric starter, 6-speed transmission, 18-inch rear wheel was basically impossible unless you went and simply bought a KTM or got close by building one yourself. The starting grids at events such as the GNCC series displayed this trend no matter how well Yamaha racers did on converted machinery. Luckily, a very motivated group of project engineers in Japan have a thing for this off-road segment. Because of this, talks began early on with regard to using the 250cc YZF platform to create the YZFX off-road racer. The FX is an all-new machine but takes heavily from the YZ250F that was so spectacular last year. Click here for a link to the test. But from a performance view there are quite a few very specific similarities with the YZ250F and unnecessary differences. The architecture is always including the rearward exiting exhaust, the airbox atop the engine and the frame's geometry and the components attached. The frame is identical to the WR250F and does differ in some mounting tabs, as in skid plate tabs, which is not standard, and some of the electronics. The bigger changes are in small details like the thinner engine mounts to allow more flex. Suspension components are the same as YZF, except for the lighter spring rate on the fork and altered internal valving set specifically for off-road riding, racing. The engine, from the power-producing side of things, is identical to the YZ250F from the forward-mounted 44mm throttle body to the end of the competition-only muffler. The cam timing and profile is claimed to be identical with the only difference being an altered decompression ramp on the exhaust cam to accompany the electric starting. The changes in the transmission are substantial with a 6-speed wide ratio tranny. First gear is lower than the YZ's and sixth the jump over the YZ's fifth. The engine has electric starting with the kickstart backup. The charging system has been boosted to a 160-watt alternator with added flywheel mass as well. Changes to the clutch include a different pull ratio, lighter springs, different oiling holes and a different material on the friction plates. Off-road features include an 18-inch rear wheel and kickstand. Since the bike is full competition, the jitter power tuner can be attached and ignition and fuel maps can be altered and tuned. Note, there is no spark arrestor in the muffler, yet there is the plug to easily attach the radiator cooling fan if a rider wants to upgrade. The YZFX has a power delivery of its own and a very good cross of aggression and WR rideability. The electric starting is great and the bike fires right up even on cold mornings, only needing choke on the coldest. It settles down to a nice idle and the sound of the muffler is a little on the loud side for an off-road machine, yet understand this is a pure moto muffler. The throttle response is crisp and there is even get a little noise out of the airbox, a snarl sound when the cams really start to function. The good thing about this motor is that first gear's internal ratio is lower than the YZF for tighter riding and less clutch abuse. Second is just a little lower than the YZF as well, and third is nearly identical, meaning the second to third jump is a little more than the YZF. But the question is, can you feel it? Not really, as the FX is tuned a little more for torque and rideability, so this plays more into the pickup than the gear spacing. Where the FX has bigger gaps, and an extra gear, compared to the YZF, in real riding conditions the FX uses the gears longer than the YZ, which makes shifting less critical, less often. We did not have any issues with the gaps being too large, even with heavier riders, and a change to a larger rear sprocket could erase any issues easily and you'd still have a longer spread than a YZF. And we saw a solid 89 miles per hour GPS indicated on the FX with stock gearing, which is mighty fast for a 250cc anything. The clutch pull is light and the engagement a little on the soft side, not a lot of initial bite, but not many complained. On the very bottom, FX is a typical 250F in that it is easy to stall if the throttle is closed. The added flywheel weight helps as much as possible without making the bike feel too sluggish. The power builds and builds in a pretty linear pull and can really scream out to the near 13,000 RPM rev limiter, which is hard to hit without being abusive. Compared to the snap on the bottom, lower mid-range, which very few will ride, the spike in the lower one-third of the RPM range, is a little softer than the YZF, and the Rs don't build as quick. Compared to the WR250F, the FX is very responsive and makes the EPA setting feel very sleepy and very lean. Once in the meat of the power, it is difficult to distinguish between YZF and FX, other than the FX revs up a little slower and isn't so quick to hit the rev cut, nor does it feel like it tapers off in power as abruptly. We mounted an FMF Hex Q4 to hit the trails, and it did as expected. It quieted up the sound level a significant amount and slowed the surge of power and the build of the RPM. For trail riding, it was an improvement at a more relaxed pace. We're pretty sure we could bring back some of the response with the use of the jitter tuner, which we will test later since the bike is so spot on with the stock open exhaust. No matter what, the FX is a very powerful 250F that is easy to ride and has get up and go. It always wants to pick up as the throttle response and FI settings are spot on, no matter the altitude. We ride it at 7,500 feet and for sure you could feel the reduction in power, but the mapping was spot on. Equipped with the same suspension that is on the YZF, Kib SSS spring fork, the quality of the components is capable of doing pretty much anything. Set up with a one-step lighter fork spring on the front and the same spring rate on the rear when compared to the YZF, Yamaha was looking for that off-road compliance with race stiffness. It appeared to us the FX seems set up for a rider in the 170-pound range, but easily handled our heavier riders just fine off-road where it is what it should. It holds the bike up in the stroke without being too rigid in the initial part of the stroke. It also has really good bottoming resistance. It is the kind of bike that can be ridden fast without worrying about the suspension holding you back. On the motocross track it also performs well, although not as firm as a pure MX bike. It absorbs a lot more of the ripples, bumps and jars the rider a lot less. It will uses more of the stroke on the jump faces and less smooth on landings. For a fast rider or heavier rider, this is a little bit of a problem, though adding compression to the fork and the shock can go a long way holding the bike up more. But it is a trade-off in bump compliance. We would call it a track day bike more than a motocross racer. But as a mix for doing off-road racing and having the ability to tackle the track, the Yamaha is one of the best compromises we've sampled. One thing you have to get used to is the appearance. Looking at the front of the YZFX where the radiator shrouds are, it appears wide. So some assumed it was heavy, till they rode it. Being a 250F and weighing it at 247.5 pounds with a full tank of gas, the scale is not the best selling point for the FX. But if you just rode it and never put it on the scale, you'd never suspect it weighted that much. It has a very agile handling feel that could be described as light on its wheels. The power helps this, the suspension complements this, and the bike really works as a whole. The motocross YZF has more of a front steering character where most riders felt the FX was more balanced. It turns very predictably and when you get your weight forward it really sticks. The Dunlop MX-81 front tire is a good match in all of the different conditions we rode on. The rear tire was a little less grip, but that showed the FX could slide as well as it would track. There is very good connectivity between the throttle and the rear wheel. Jumping the FX isn't the lightest feeling once in the air, but it isn't anything to be concerned with. We ran our test bike with roughly 110 mm of rear shock sag with the rider aboard. And where the WR acted a little unstable, the FX had a lot less of the straight. We credit the boosted power in the mid for keeping the FX more active and stable at the same time. Like the WR, the FX isn't the roomiest with the handlebar in the stock position, but moving them to the forward mount in the adjustable top clamp opens up the riding cockpit. Getting to the gas cap in a quick manner is tough with the stock setup, though there are aftermarket options out there. And if needing more than 2 gallons is an issue, you'll need that aftermarket help. We rode into the high 60-mile range on a spirited desert trail ride. We could see it running out in the 30-mile range in racing conditions.